I am from the Boston Revolutionary Socialists, and for 10 days, I traveled to occupied and colonized Palestine and critically witnessed this steadfast nation of 14 million and the colonizing force they face and some of the lessons for our struggle back here. And I'm going to report back to you. I don't want to say the trip was life-changing. I think it was more path-affirming for me. One of my earliest political memories of my life was debating my freshman high school history teacher as Israel was building its apartheid and annexation wall in the early 2000s. In 2014, I was part of organizing Boston for Palestine, an impromptu coalition that sprung up during Israel's assault on Gaza that summer. So Palestine solidarity is my default, but it's so different to actually be there and actually see the wall up close, to face armed Israeli soldiers at checkpoints, to understand more intimately the Palestinian people, the brutality they face, and their steadfast resistance. And to give you a sense of that, let me start at the end. On my last day in Palestine, I had boarded my plane to Istanbul. I had twisted through 3 hours of security checks and was sitting, seatbelt fastened, awaiting takeoff. Aisles were clear. You know, I was just at that stage before you kick off from the gate. Then a gate attendant, roughly my mom's age, walked down the clear plane aisle, past all the other passengers to my seat. She asked me for my name in a harsh Israeli English. Sir, you need to leave the plane. Security has to ask you some questions about your check bag. So I walked out with her out of the fully boarded plane, my name and seat number written on a blank ticket stub in her hand. And at the gate desk, I met one and then a second member of Israeli security. And, you know, I knew this was kind of a possibility given how Ben Gurion Airport works and the Israeli state worked through my experience. But, you know, I still faced a whole litany of questions, some of which I had already been asked at the 2 or 3 security desks before this. But then I got even more pointed questions because they found materials relating to Palestinian refugees in my check bag. Where did I get them? Who did I meet with? What are the organizations did I volunteer for any organizations while I was there? What do I do for work? So I just want to take a step back and just think about, you know, this year, many of us in the States have stood in solidarity with Ukrainian refugees for obvious reasons. We've shared articles, we've slapped yellow and blue stickers on our water bottles, bumpers, car bumpers everywhere. And I just want to, just for a moment, can you imagine the outrage if a supposed Western democracy, let alone Russia, came after people who had academic reports like I did on Ukrainian refugees as opposed to Palestinian refugees? This gives you a very small taste of, you know, I think what I experienced while I was there. And, you know, what I can say is that, you know, what I saw in the West Bank in 48, also known as Israel, was worse than what I expected. I knew about the crimes, you know, that were being done in Gaza, sure, the blockade, but even without that suffocating blockade, it's bad. Without a doubt, Israel is a military state, a colonial dictatorship with the thinnest veneer of democracy. But before I actually, you know, get into all of that, all of what I witnessed, I want to take 5 minutes to speed through the history of Palestine, because we have to understand, how did it get this way? So this is the process of colonization that has taken place. This is from visualizing Palestine to give a sense. To start with, before Israel, before the British, Palestine had been ruled for 400 years by the Ottomans. Compared to the barbarity of today's colonizers, the Ottomans were relatively mild, but they still ruled over Palestine and the larger Arab region. With the end of World War I came the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. The British and French empires carved up the Ottoman corpse. France took Syria, for example, and Britain took Palestine. In the same period, the Zionist movement was born. This political movement accepted, escaped, and even allied with European anti-Semitism rather than fight it. In the words of Theodor Herzl, founder of Zionism, after the Dreyfus Affair, the anti-Semitic Dreyfus Affair, quote, I achieved a freer attitude towards anti-Semitism. Above all, I recognize the emptiness and futility of trying to quote unquote combat anti-Semitism. Instead, Zionism allied with empires, even extremely anti-Semitic ones, to support its colonization plans. As Herzl said to Count von Plov, a Russian Tsarist official that sponsored anti-Jewish pogroms and lynch mobs in Russia, support us and we'll take care of the, quote, obnoxious and subversive anarcho-Bolshevik Jews. Or as Zionist leader Chaim Weizmann argued to the British government, a Jewish Palestine would be a safeguard to England, in particular in respect to the Suez Canal. Let me just show you that quote so you give it a sense. And let me just go back for that. In 1917, with control of Palestine assured, Britain made its Balfour Declaration. They promised Palestine to the Zionists. Over the next 30 years, we see a process of colonization and conflict between Palestinians, Zionists, and the British. The Zionists and the British were allied, but sometimes fought each other over the pace of emigration and colonization. And this period concludes with the Nakba in 1948 after the pullout of British troops. The Nakba was a mass terror campaign by Zionist militias that drove out some 700 to 900,000 Palestinians from their homes. Zionist paramilitaries surrounded village after village using survey data supplied by the Jewish National Fund's quote unquote charity on, let's say, 3 sides of a village, and then using violence to drive out the indigenous population in the direction they wanted, to Lebanon, to Jordan, to Egypt, etc. In the worst of cases, like Deir Yassin, mass rapes, the wanton murder of pregnant people, and massacres of men and boys occurred. This event, though, I think we have to understand, is not in the distant past for Palestinians. I met Palestinian after Palestinian where the family trauma from the Nakba was still in recent memory. One activist in Haifa told me of her grandmother, someone she grew up with, fleeing from Haifa up to Lebanon, then crossing the mountains to Syria, only to sneak back to Haifa, avoiding Zionist machine guns all along the way. And that's why, you do see some folks that are still Palestinians that are still inside the 48 territories, what is now known as Israel. So this was the rosy dawn of Israel. After this, the Zionists established their state, created or expanded laws to legalize land confiscation, divided Palestinians from each other, and continued the process of colonial theft. Every step of the way, this theft has been aided and abetted by imperial powers. First Britain, then the US. These and other empires, have an interest in the Middle East, and having allies, such as in this case Israel, is really important for them. These are some other dates that are important if folks are interested to know. But like I said, this is the argument that Zionists were making at the time about being a safeguard to British interests in the Middle East. And Winston Churchill in 1915 agreed with that. And we see that all through today. This is Joe Biden in 1987. It's about time we stop apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. It's the best $3 billion investment we make. If it weren't for an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect our interests in the region. And this is a quote that he has repeated year after year, time and again. He repeated in 2015, repeated in 2022. And it's not just rhetoric. The US military, the US provides immense military aid to Israel every year to the tune of $3.8 billion. Is another graphic from Visualizing Palestine. And, this is all a part of their, the process of imperialism in the region, and especially, in the US. So we see this quote from Joe Biden in 2013. This is just after the Arab Spring, the Middle East and North African revolutions. And how, as he says, the region has gone from forced calm of dictatorship, funny how they talk about the forced calm of dictatorship as being somehow a good thing, to the euphoria of revolution. These changes in the Middle East affect both of our national security interests. So very clear. The US may occasionally criticize aspects of this colonial theft. After all, Palestinian resistance to Israeli oppression can also destabilize the region. The Egyptian revolution has some of its roots in Palestine solidarity protests that happened during the Israel, series of Israeli attacks on Palestine and Lebanon. And, on the other hand, Israel may sometimes pull at the leash or flirt with other patrons, like when it's run military exercises with Russia a few years ago, or China, who's become a larger trading partner. But fundamentally, Israel is the best proxy that US imperialism has in the Middle East, and US empire is Israel's best patron. So I want to shift now to actually talk about my experiences and what I saw. Running on two separate computers. So one of our first full day, we were based in East Jerusalem, and we were able to get a tour of the city of Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. And we were guided by an activist from Grassroots Al-Quds, one of the organizations that was instrumental in some of the protests that you might have seen last year in Sheikh Jarrah, when against the sort of settler theft of Palestinian homes. And it's important to state that this tour that we had of East Jerusalem was as much a tour of Khalil's life as it was a tour of the city and the general Palestinian experience within it. Like, for example, when we drove by one Israeli military police station, this fortress of barbed wire and steel and concrete, Khalil reminisced of being jailed there for weeks when he was just 9 years old. And he is one among 53,000 other Palestinian children whom Israel has jailed since 1967. He joked with us on the bus, there were a lot of big memories for me in that jail, sort of hiding, both healing and hiding his trauma through humor. We later stopped in front of this section of the annexation wall, also in East Jerusalem. You get a sense of how the size of this thing. And, this wall right here, this section cut off Khalil's walking route to and from school as a kid after it got built. He was imprisoned again at 16 for 2 months after defending an old classmate who was being harassed for her hijab by soldiers at a checkpoint near to this. He sort of sent his classmate away and then led soldiers on a chase around the gas station convenience store, the one you can see on the right hand side of the picture there, for about 20 to 30 minutes until he was nabbed and jailed. And then when his history teacher tried advocating for his release, the teacher was then jailed for a year. So this annexation wall, cuts through this historic city. I'm an atheist. I don't have any relationship with religion at this point in my life, but I could really feel the power of belief that existed inside the sort of city limits of Jerusalem. But cutting through that power of belief and that holiness, as much as you can believe in that, was this annexation wall that tainted every aspect of life there. I next want to move on to one of the things we participated in as part of the delegation trip that I did with Eyewitness Palestine was the olive harvest, because olives and the olive harvest have immense cultural significance for Palestinians. And, um, you know, so much of what we hear about Palestinians in the mainstream news is, especially if we listen to Israeli talking points, is, Palestinians are terrorists, right? And for the state of Israel, they point to organizations like this group, not a group that we met with, but a similar group to a group we met with the Union of Agricultural Work Committees, UAC. This is one of six organizations that within the past year were quote unquote designated terrorist organizations. And they had their offices raided and confiscated. They even took a fucking toaster out of one of these groups' offices. So we met an organization very much like UAC. It's called the Alard, also known as the Land, during the olive harvest. And, they do essentially the same work that UAC does, very similar. They support Palestinian farmers defending their land and supporting them as they harvest. And these people weren't terrorists. They were grandmothers in their 70s. They were agronomists that had just graduated from university. And instead of cultivating death, as Israel would like to claim, these were people cultivating life. I want to contrast that instead to, when we went to the village of Wadi Fukin in Area C, which is an area that is under direct military control by Israel, and is sort of the sharpest edge of the colonization of the West Bank. Later that day, we visited this small village of about 1,500 residents, I believe. And as you can see, this is the playground where Palestinian children play. And on the hill right there is a settlement, is a colony of some 60,000 people that was built and filled in about 3 years. And it's not just that folks live with these massive concrete high rises just on the hill above them, knowing that they are massively outnumbered, but the Israeli military will chase Palestinian children out of this very playground pictured. At night, settlers will come down and scrawl racist graffiti like "Death to Arabs" on the youth soccer fields. That's to the left of that photo. In daylight, dozens of them will march down fully armed from the hills and terrorize the villages, as they did just days before our arrival. And then, you can barely see it, but off to the right of that photo over there, the settlement will literally release its sewage down to the hills where Palestinian farmers are farming, their crops, including the olive trees. It's that literal. So it's the literal bile of occupation and dispossession that is, killing and affecting people's lives, and killing their crops and just generally terrorizing people. But I think that, this gets to the sort of point of, when we think about terror, rarely does our common sense consider the daily terror of settlements looming over Palestinian villages. It doesn't think of the, indignities of poisoned water or demolished homes. And I think there's a reason for that, because to do so would highlight the very horror that's hidden behind the everyday operations of this violence, whether in Palestine, where I think that we can also point to the indigenous situation in the United States as well. But instead, the imperialism and capitalism holds up the aberrant Palestinian terrorists as the problem. And that's where I want to move next, because the biggest stereotype is that the Middle East equals dangerous. And, like, just as a concrete example, while I was in Palestine, I didn't tell my mom at all. Like, I talked to her like once or twice, and I just, I straight up lied to her. I was like, yeah, I'm, surfing in Portugal. After I got back, I finally came clean to her, and she was so happy I didn't tell her, because she was like, yeah, if I knew, I would have been throwing up every single night. But that's, yeah, like, that's a bit of a joke, but it is, like, there is this sort of question of, like, is it dangerous or whatever? And what were the moments that I actually did feel unsafe? And they were almost entirely when I grazed, even just barely, Israel's military state. In Hebron, we went through a checkpoint to cross this massive militarized wall, another annexation wall that bisected the city. We were 25 of us in this delegation were led into this cold concrete and steel room that looked less like a border crossing through customs and more like a military prison interrogation chamber. Our trip guide, a Palestinian, was turned away at the entrance, so we were on our own. One at a time, we put our passports up to the sort of foggy bulletproof glass for the attending soldiers to examine. And as we tried to arrange ourselves in this tight room, one of the delegates, a young mom, just happened to step the wrong way, and she accidentally set off this metal detector, which I thought it was off, and then this wailing klaxon just breaks this uneasy silence, and our eyes dart around, to each other. And then all of a sudden, this Israeli soldier storms in, waves this assault rifle around, yells and starts yelling in Hebrew. Eventually, finally, he realized, he listens to us and realizes that none of us speak Hebrew, so he switches to English and just starts yelling, passports, somebody shouldn't show their passport, put them in the air, as he's waving this assault rifle around. And, we know that that's bullshit. We all showed our passports up to the bulletproof glass, but, we raised our passports again and, sort of like very slowly, like we were, dealing with a wild dog. Through the checkpoint, we reached this area that's pictured, which is, settler territory, the settler half of Hebron. Although there are still Palestinians who live here, by the way. They're just dealing with this stuff every day. And, we end up meeting up with, the local activists and this group, Youth Against Settlements, in their house up on the hill. We have lunch, we have some conversation, and then we end up going to the Al-Ibrahimi. We head towards the Al-Ibrahimi Mosque, which was the site of an Israeli terrorist massacre back in the 90s, which is why they cut the city in half with this, or what they claim is the reason they cut the city in half. But, when we re-entered the settlers' neighborhood after lunch, first of all, our guide couldn't walk down the main street of this neighborhood because he was Palestinian. So he had to walk through a cemetery to meet up with us at the mosque. But, here's some of the things we saw. Streets are abandoned except for this settler family that's walking, with this guy walking with his kids and his wife, except if you notice very closely, slung along his shoulder, his far shoulder, is not a bag of diapers, but an assault rifle slung over his arm. And, later when I was, I happened to have to stop for gas. When I was driving from my taxi, I was in a taxi cab driving from Haifa to Ramallah and then to Jerusalem. We had to stop for gas in a settlement, and they're just advertising for a gun shop just in the settlement. Of course, it's illegal for Palestinians to have any sort of firearms. And then similarly, after we sort of wait for this settler family to walk by, then we descend the stairs. We're walking through this neighborhood. We see behind a barricade a soldier playing with some colonizer children. That didn't feel reassuring at all. It just kind of surreal. And then a few moments later, as we're walking like down the street, someone in our group just kind of quietly alerts us that the soldier has started following us. So gun in hand, the soldier stopped playing with the kids, left the barricade, and did start tracking us. And so I sort of glance back. I see this guy grab his military grade walkie-talkie and start speaking into it. And then I turn back around and I keep walking. When like 200 meters away, I see another soldier at another barricade listening to and speaking into his own walkie-talkie. And as we sort of continue walking down the street, they close in on us like a pincer and order us to all stop and pull out our passports, merely for just walking down the street. And before I continue, just as an aside, when you enter Israel, you're given this paper visa that's basically like you are authorized to be here. And also that paper visa also allows them to revoke that authorization at any time. We were always instructed to keep it with us, to clip it to our passports, to never lose it. Well, because if we didn't, we could be detained and sent back on the plane. Well, one of us either never received or lost their slip. So he only had his passport. And for pretty much the whole trip, this was fine until we run into these soldiers that just randomly stopped us on the street. And, that's the scene there in the bottom right, where the soldier, just takes one of our delegate members, and we're like not sure what the fuck is going to happen. Because we just keep moving, on instructions of, one of our delegate leads. And as I'm looking back, I see like this military Humvee that pulls up to the two soldiers and our delegate member. Thankfully, we were able to, meet up with them again at Al Ibrahimi Mosque. I don't know exactly how he was able to, convince them that he wasn't a danger or whatever. But that just kind of gives you a sense of like how militarized this society is, where just even walking down a street, just regular internationals, not like raising any kind of scene or anything like that, will just get randomly stopped by armed members of the military. And like I said, it's going into that settlement and seeing the sign for the gun shop, I think also gives you a sense of how deeply violent this, the colonizing society is. It's really, I would say, a white supremacist wet dream, to be honest. Like a heavily military society, a colonizing population living in essentially fortresses, armed, quote unquote, defending themselves against, but for the resistance, a sort of a darker, a quote unquote darker enemy. And it's there I want to shift a little bit into, these are also give you a sense of, this is the same neighborhood. On the left, we have graffiti scrawled, "Gas the Arabs." And on the right is a school that's like maybe I don't know, 200 meters away, 200 yards away. And I don't read Arabic, but the text was about defending the right to an education. And this, I think, just speaks to like really the bifurcation, like this is the clear contrast. One wants to gas the Arabs, one wants, one actually wants the right to an education and a right to be free. And that's where I want to shift things a little bit, because it's one, I think my experience was not just about seeing the resistance, but also I think connecting it with my own experience. We visited Ramallah for like, I don't know, 24, 48 hours. And while I was there, we went out one night, just a few of us, and we stopped at this bar that had all these fucking amazing revolutionary posters on it. And it was like, all right, these are the posters that, were for the Palestinian left, that connected the Palestinian liberation with the fight for socialism and, fight against other forms of oppression. And I was like, all right, cool. This is a place where I feel like home. And like, I met this guy who, like when I first met him, I'm like, wasn't sure exactly if he was Palestinian because he doesn't fit the sort of flat stereotypes of what quote unquote a Palestinian should look like. Like his hair and beard were long and a bit scraggly. Like he talked about psychedelics I had never even heard of. He had this like hippie crust punk vibe with this smiley face tattooed on his right forearm that said like, it was like a smiley face with like ACAB written down the middle of it. So we this is somebody who, like I grew up with somebody like folks very much like this. I know I also know like people like this on this call. And it reminded me of, before I'd left for Palestine, I did do a little bit of traveling. I was traveling with my friend Jeff, and we the last night before I left, we were sort of like out at a bar, reminiscing about our youth and all the bullshit we used to get into. Like, we used to throw like fucking trash off of a train bridge onto train tracks below, and just like cause trouble. Like, one of us poured kerosene on a jungle gym pole, and one of us slid down it and burned off all our fingerprints. On the other hand, around that same age, the age that we were doing all this bullshit, this guy that I met, and his best friend were in resistance, because they had lived through Israeli tanks on their front lawns. The Israeli military had taken away their fathers during the second Intifada in the early 2000s when he was just 5 years old. And as he said to me, my dad came back after 1 week with tears in his eyes. I didn't know what happened and no one told me. And so instead of throwing trash off of train bridges, he and his friend threw stones and Molotov cocktails at Israeli military vehicles rolling through their neighborhood. And it just struck me that just by the very circumstances of birth and just the circumstances of history, that this is somebody who was so much, reminded me of so many people back home. And just by the circumstances he was forced into, he had to fight and struggle. And whereas throwing trash off a train bridge, we could laugh about it as like, oh, that's just like stupid kid shit we used to do, my friend Jeff and I. Instead, with him, his best friend, like I said, they always used to go out and struggle together, until one day his friend decided to go out by himself and got shot by the Israeli military and left in the dirt and the mud, and they just let him fucking bleed out. And like that is, you know, like that, yeah, that fucking struck me. Because that I think gets to, I think, the reality for people, that folks are forced into fighting, um, forced into resistance. That's not what they want to do. I mean, this guy, today he's a DJ and a bartender. He wants to create spaces for culture, for happiness, chill spaces for people to recover. He knows people need to fight, but he also, you know, he just wants to like travel and, you know, tried to leave, tried to travel with his, a girlfriend who was like an aid worker from Germany. And like the Jordanians wouldn't let him out of the West Bank, just by the fact he was Palestinian. As he said to me, he sent me this thing, this little piece afterwards. He says, quote, "When I want to travel from one city to another through military checkpoints, young soldiers no older than 19 are pointing their guns at us, ready for any ambiguous move to shoot their fire. Having to carry all my identification documents with me all the time, even for a 30-minute car ride. Usually, a drive from one city to Nablus is 1 hour. Sometimes we used to roam for 6 hours to reach my relative's house in Nablus, crossing one checkpoint after another. Having to open my personal belongings and even get a full body security scan has stripped my feeling of safety and personal privacy. I've seen the wall being built around Palestinian cities and villages in my short lifetime, disconnected from relatives and friends and zoned into fragmented IDs. For me, it is an apartheid wall, segregating people from each other based on identity and race. I live 1 hour drive from the sea, but I can't reach it because I need a permit from Israel. I have never been to the beach." And if you know me, you know how that, as somebody who's a surfer, that definitely, that struck a chord with me. The other thing that my friends and I used to do when we were a little younger and we could get away with it was urban explore abandoned buildings, sort of do things that were probably a little less than legal. But it's a different thing. I think actually touring through a building, a home that was torn down by the Israeli military, demolished as part of its colonization plan, it really, again, like struck a chord in me, in the sense that this was something that like we used to do, but it has just a different meaning in a different context based on the the actual experience of colonization and all of that. This is, I'll just show you some photos to give you a sense of some of the stuff that we saw. Just like, and this was all part of a tour that we did with this group, Stop the Wall, of the annexation wall in different parts of the West Bank, and just the effects that it has on Palestinian society. And you can see what we mean by an annexation wall, because those tall buildings over there are Palestinian. Those are Palestinian, sort of, those are Palestinian homes and apartment buildings. On this side, where I'm taking the photo from, is also Palestinian land. And you can see there's the wall, the close side of the wall, and then on the other side, right on the other side of the field before the buildings start, you see the other half of the wall. So essentially, it carves out this whole section of land that is, they're not like this used to be Palestine's airport, and it was demolished during the first Intifada by the Israeli military, and instead they decided to try to carve out this land for Israeli use. So they used the wall to do it. And as part of that annexation, And as part of creating the wall and then creating the road systems that are necessary, quote unquote, necessary for separating out and the roads for the Israeli colonizers, and then for the Palestinians that these roads run under, whole communities have been essentially made into ghost towns because of the wall. And this is one of the communities that we see that used to 20-25 years ago used to be a vibrant community, and now it's just abandoned or near abandoned buildings, and used for throwing stones through glass, breaking glass. Again, like these are all urban exploring, all that stuff I used to do with my friends, but again, it just has a different meaning. The other thing I want to talk about is I think that through my experiences in Palestine, I think I really I saw similarities in, especially like the indigenous struggles in the U.S. In like Black and Afro-descendant struggles here, and migrant struggles. You see all these different aspects of this. These photos in particular are from an unrecognized Palestinian Bedouin village in the Nakab, which is the southern desert of the 48 territories. And it just I've driven through the Southwest and seen what reservations sort of look like. I've never actually had an opportunity to visit a reservation, but I remember when I was driving cross country, seeing some like communities that were like this because they were forced into they were forcibly underdeveloped and devastated and ghettoized. I mean, in this particular village, because it's unrecognized, like folks don't even have addresses. If there's an ambulance, they need to call an ambulance. They have to bring the person out to outside of the village and to the main road because ambulances can't get there. And I think the last thing I want to say is just like I want to talk a little bit about identity and some of the besides the overt processes of colonization that I think that that I talked about earlier. There's also another complex aspect of colonization, and that's the elimination of the Palestinian identity and history. And it looks different in different places, but one of the things that Israel is trying to do right now in East Jerusalem is change, really trying to incorporate push as many people Palestinians as they can out of the city as part of its colonization. But the folks that remain really trying to Israelize them in a way that eliminates their history. So like the textbooks in schools that Palestinian children are going to remove the Palestinian flag, remove really any discussion of the Nakba, remove any sort of understanding of Palestinian culture and history and all of that sort of stuff. And when it does presents it as it does in Israeli schools that, inside 48 that Palestinian children go to, where it's, we are the advanced civilization, Israel, and, the Arab civilizations are backwards and all of that sort of stuff. So I want to, I guess, really highlight how profound it was also, and I think this identity elimination also takes place amongst people who, because of the Nakba and because of the forced diaspora of the Palestinian community. I mean, 7 million of the 11 million Palestinian members of the 7 million of the 11 million Palestinians that exist in the world are refugees, or descendants of refugees. And so it was really profound for me to also see people's experiences coming home, to like being able to visit their families, or like, and the places that they, whose, their grandparents or their great grandparents have connection to. I think one of the things that I had as a question going into this trip was really trying to understand the practicality of the right of return, which is the right of, so it's a human right of refugees to return to their homes. And, understanding as part of that right of return, understanding the practicality of, what I see is and what the majority of the Palestinian nation sees as key, which is a one state, democratic one state solution for Palestine, with equal rights. And I think one of the things that is very clear going through it is that the colonization that's taking place is far from completed. I think it's so wrong to speak of post-Zionism, or, this is, there's nothing to reverse here, because, as for example, the example of Wadi Fukain, I mean, 60,000 people being, a settlement colony being built in 3 years and packed with 60,000 people, and they're still recruiting, they're still bringing people in. That's not a moment in past that has been completed. That's something that, it has to be addressed, and it has to be resisted. And I think that it is being resisted. I want to sort of begin to wrap up by talking about where I see the sort of state of resistance is, because we were in Palestine at a particularly interesting moment. There was when we had arrived, the uprising in Nablus had just started. While we were in Bethlehem, we witnessed a general strike across the West Bank, where all the shops shut down, all the Palestinian shops shut down, and sort of, and I think and at the same time, I think we're also we're seeing a context that, the state of oppression is different. The state of the resistance is different for sure. But I think there are some subjective factors that I think that we can say are somewhat similar to what we're seeing here, in the sense that, like, folks in Palestine, from what I saw, and this is the one thing that I think was talked about the most by all the different speakers that we met with, the guides and the people that we met with, organizations, is that, the they're, as the quote says, they are like, Palestinians are stubborn. They are also very generous people. But the state of the left is also fragmented. And I think when I think about what does Palestinian solidarity look like, I think there's, like, we have to expose the role of the US. We have to build as much political solidarity with the Palestinian people as possible. But I think as Palestinians in Palestine start to address the fragmentation of their own, and I think that if you've got a chance to read some of the pieces that came out, I think you can see some of the I don't know, the seeds of that. I think there's also the fragmentation that we have to address here. And that, I think, is really what this whole, why we organize as we do on the left, as socialists, as communists, as revolutionaries. We have to address the fragmentation and in the tasks that we have right here, even as we're we're in such solidarity with Palestine always and forever. And um, I don't know, I could go go on, but I feel like I kind of yeah, I'll just leave it for the discussion.